All right. Welcome here into the live stream tracking Invest 97L. So if you do have any questions, I will be answering as many as I possibly can here for this tropical system. But as you can clearly see earlier from this morning, we're back up to we're at a high chance here for development. This is the 8 p.m. advisory. So just came in here from the 8 p.m. advisory. We want to keep an eye out on this very, very closely because still so far, Florida, you're in the path of the storm. We're going to take a look here at the models very shortly here. But something to pay attention to. Definitely something to pay attention to. Trying to get everything still set up here. So we have a little bit to be paying attention to right now. There has been a little bit of a change in the 7-day development area here. Obviously, it's not going to develop in just 7 days. It's going to develop much more before that. But obviously, the big question is where does it go? Where does it go? That's the big question here. So make sure if you are just joining in right now, make sure if you have any questions, you can leave it down below. And I'll try to get to you as much as I possibly can. So let's jump right into it. So National Hurricane Center here, still around a 70% chance here by the National Hurricane Center. A little bit of difference of a 7-day development area has kind of, shortened itself a little bit here. So that's at least some good news that we kind of have an idea. The National Hurricane Center kind of has a little bit more of an idea on where it could possibly be going. But, excuse me, but the question obviously is, when does it form and where does it go? So taking a look here, 40% chance for the next 2 days as the storm does push off over here. Most likely, the question is, I think they're still bringing it over Cuba. So that's going to limit that development, obviously. Not too much shear is in the way right now. So I want to keep an eye out on this very, very closely here. But the severe weather really is just going to be continuing on a little bit here. So the little bit of severe weather. Also, we've already seen some storms go through Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico's gotten some pretty big storms. The good news is that Puerto Rico is, probably by the next couple hours, not going to be impacted much by this. Now it's going to head into the Dominican Republic, Haiti, and parts of eastern Cuba. So a little bit more to be paying attention to as we go on throughout the next couple of hours. What do we see with the storm and the satellite, and especially when will it form here before it pushes up to the north here? Taking a look here at the Euros, 24 to 72 hours. Pretty good odds here of a tropical depression forming here in the Gulf of Mexico. Really have that, to pay attention to once we get into the Gulf of Mexico here. A little bit to be paying attention to because I feel like, even though we're in the Gulf of Mexico, the question is the intensity. What are we expecting for the intensity? Because obviously the intensity, something completely to be paying attention to very, very closely. The Gulf of Mexico is crazy, so we'll have to definitely keep an eye out on that. If we had a tropical storm, apparently the tropical storm probabilities are not very strong here. So, a little bit to be paying attention to, obviously. Taking a look here at the spaghetti models here. Still looking at the 18Z models, could be seeing something completely different here in the future. Look how much spread is still there. If we have a little bit more of a southern type of storm here, that's going to bring it more off to the west here, and that will impact the Florida Panhandle. If it goes more of the northern part of Cuba, that will hug the west coast of Florida, which could be a whole different scenario for, different areas completely. So if we take a look here for the Florida Panhandle, we can clearly see, it's so spread out we don't even exactly know, but I would say we're waiting for the 00Z models to come out because I feel like we're going to see maybe a little bit more of a push here going into more of the Florida Bend because that's what we're seeing more majority of these model runs going in. When will we see it form? Probably, maybe, most likely in 48 hours it has the best possibility of forming. Some people might think it could form right over here once it gets off the water, but it's just not looking too organized right now. Right now, as according to the models, not anticipating more than a category 2. So not anticipating more than a category 2. Really, these models are keeping it pretty weak here until possibly once it gets over here by the Carolinas, which the Carolinas need to start watching just in case as well, because that's what we could be paying attention to very closely as well. So Keeping an eye out on these storms very, very closely. We're going to keep an eye out on some of these storms. It's going to be very intense here on what we could be seeing here. No major hurricane, I would say, is most likely expected right now at the moment. That's all I would say is right here at the moment. We're not expecting any possible major hurricane here at the moment because, I mean, we're just not looking at a too favorable environment here. No Category 4, none of that right now. Could it intensify? It could, but most likely, I would say the best chances for a major hurricane, if there was going to be one, it would be off the east coast of the United States here, but we're hoping for not that, you know. Taking a look here at the CMC ensembles. We don't usually take a look at these ensembles a little bit more right here, but let's take a look at these ensembles. We're, as you can clearly see, keeping an eye out, obviously, for the west coast of Florida. No matter what, the Florida Peninsula is going to get rain majority of the time. So, but unless it does go a little bit more off to the west here, we could see maybe more rain here in the Florida Peninsula. So a little bit more to be paying attention to. Still very spread out for the CMC. We're definitely going to have to wait until the 00Z comes out for the CMC model here, but keeping an eye out on that. This is kind of our general location on where we could be anticipating some storm, really. So wanting to keep an eye out on this storm very closely on where it could possibly go. Taking a look here at the satellite picture. I mean, I would say it's looked pretty good this morning, but now seeming to die down maybe just a little bit here. Convection still blowing up in some of these still areas over here, over Hispaniola especially, but really getting close to getting back into the waters, but then heading over Cuba. The question is where, you know, what part of Cuba does it head over? So taking a look here, the water vapor, though, completely different situation. We still have some dry air, obviously, off to the northeast, some dry air over here just above Cuba. But I think, you know, what's gonna, whoopsies, I think what's gonna happen though is we're gonna see a little bit more of a, I mean, it's so split. We could be seeing it go into more dry air over here for the northern part, or a little bit more the southern part, which has not as much dry air as the first one, but, or as the top of the Cuba. We'll have to keep an eye out, obviously, on that. Let's take a look here at some of the forecast models, because we've been seeing a little bit of these forecast models, and the HWRF and the HMON have been updated. I've been on these models all day today, so a little bit to be paying attention to as we go on, obviously, throughout the next couple of hours on some of these runs. So if we head down here to the southeast, GFS model for the 18Z brings it a little bit more down to the south here. So a little bit more of a southern type of push here, going inland, kind of near the Sarasota area, I would say. So a little bit more to the Sarasota area, so we want to keep an eye out on that. And then after, once it gets in through the Sarasota area, goes through Tampa. So a little bit more of a interesting situation could be anticipated here. But we obviously want to keep an eye out on this very closely, because I feel like there's so much to change still, but I can definitely start to see there's a little bit of a consistent thing. But then we head out to this right here in the Carolinas. Look at this. Over here, August 6th, we could be seeing a little bit more of an interesting situation here, because it stalls out over here, you know, on the sea. It starts to stall out a little bit, and then possibly could push in. This is according to the GFS here. It all depends here, because the one thing I want to pay attention to is that these ensembles are saying a little bit more of a different scenario than this of the GFS. So a little bit still to pay attention to, but the GFS has it stalling out over there just off the coast of North Carolina and South Carolina, and then brings it in. If it does that, intensity will be really, really strong here, which could be a pretty big issue here. So let's take a look here at the CMC model. If we haven't taken a look at the 12Z already, if you haven't taken a look at that, the CMC bringing it up the west coast of Florida here, bringing it more into the Big Bend here, kind of hugging the west coast, and then brings it into the Big Bend. So still a little bit to be paying attention to when it comes to this area right here. Does it possibly have that, you know, possibility for some strong storms to go through there, and possible a hurricane? That's the question. You know, some of these storms, or some of these models have picked up on a little bit more of a stronger system here in the Gulf of Mexico, but we just have to really keep an eye out on that. Icon 18Z right now. Let's take a look here at the Icon 18Z. We can clearly see, I think, you know, if we head back to the 12Z, it's most likely been staying the same, really. I would say more for the 18Z, though. It brings it a little bit more. No, the 18Z really, it has been, I mean, this is my first time as well looking at it, has really kind of just kept it the same direction right in here, where that landfall could happen. So the question is, obviously, though, if this track is right here, we could be seeing a lot of that, you know, the storm surge start to really hit the west coast of Florida here. I mean, even if, like, the storm is not a Category 1, Category 2, anything like that, we could still be seeing something pretty big for storm surge, because right now the rainfall threat will be the biggest thing. So if we head into the total accumulation here, most likely for the 18Z, I mean, look at that. Parts of southern Georgia over here, Savannah, Georgia over here, we can clearly see possibly reaching up into the 20 inches of rain. It kind of just hugs the coast here as well for the west coast of Florida. So the Tampa Bay area all the way down over here to about Naples, Cape Coral, definitely could be reaching, maybe according to the Icon model, this isn't every model, could be having possible 15, 20 inches of rain. So it's something to pay attention to. It really is something to pay attention to as we go on, obviously, throughout the next couple of hours here. Waiting for those 00Z models to come out, though, that's for sure. So heading into the regions once again here. Actually, let's just head into the HMON, because I have not taken a look at it completely yet. I've taken a look at it a little bit, but not too much. So taking a look here at the HMON, seems like it does get very, very strong when it comes over here on this side of the storm here. And we can already see, though, we kind of already can see these bands are going to start coming in, you know, as this storm, you know, pushes off over here to the north. The HMON, I would say, if we go back to the 12Z, the earlier run today, has pushed it really a lot more to the east. So, I mean, could we be seeing a trend a little bit more to the east here? That's a big question here. And I think the National Hurricane Center is also trying to figure that out too. They're sending out a plane tomorrow, so that will give us a little bit more of information on that. But these bands will start to come up and hug the west coast of Florida here. And that is where we could be seeing a little bit of that storm surge as well. But 996 millibars, 985. And then the HMON says it could be making a landfall right in this region right here in the Florida Panhandle. Very strong winds will definitely be anticipated in this. This is according to the HMON. Still could be anticipating some pretty big changes, but right now this is kind of what we're expecting. So, but once again, these outer bands as well. So even though the storm might be making landfall in northern Florida, we could be still seeing these outer bands here be producing some, strong tropical storm force winds here and some pretty, decent spin ups for tornadoes as well. So, and if we head back into 12Z, very big difference, as we can clearly see. I mean, the 12Z was bringing over here into Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama area. So very big difference for the HMON. If you haven't taken a look at that, big push to the east here. So heading into the H Wharf, still models in progress here. Still brings it over here. Now we can start to see still those outer bands. These outer bands are going to start pushing up over here into the west coast of Florida. I think if we go back over here, a little bit more of an eastern push. So a little bit of an eastern push here. Then still kind of heads kind of just a little bit more east. A little bit more east here than where the HMON put it. So a little bit something to be paying attention to as well. Keeping an eye out on that as, with this storm really quickly here, keeping an eye out on it because, I mean, we could still be seeing another eastern push tomorrow. So something to pay attention to as we go on, really something to be paying attention to. And we're still, waiting for these 00Z models to come out here. But let's take a look at the ensembles really quick because I know we're a little curious on the ensemble. So this is the European ensembles here. This is the 12Z European ensembles right now. Taking a look, as we can clearly see right here, the Euro's thinking more of a northern Cuba. And the reason why, it's starting to agree with the GFS. So if it does go over northern Cuba here, a little bit more of a closer approach to the western coast of Florida. If it goes south of Cuba here, more to the Florida Panhandle. So it's really a big question on what we see over here. But taking a look at this, you can clearly see the European model really starting to agree right in this region. So the one question I will probably most likely say is, do we expect a big turn, really down here in southern Florida here? Most likely not, I would say, but it's still definitely a possibility on the table, especially because the GFS is now saying the possibility for, Sarasota to get hit. So a little bit to be paying attention to, especially if you have anyone that lives in Florida, please let them know. this is still, you know, something that they need to be paying attention to as well. Follow the National Hurricane Center, the National Weather Services, all that. So for the European ensemble, still continuing on with the 12Z here, we can clearly see that it does bring it in right here into the northern part here of the Florida Bend. Keep an eye out on that. Then could we see a possible recurve heading back into Florida? Kind of what we saw this morning, and you can clearly look at that. A couple models bring it back into Florida, which would definitely be one of the worst case scenarios. The main operational runs that we've been taking a look have not showed that at all. So it's a little bit of an interesting situation. If it goes more up to the north, I would say it's really just going to go off to the northeast. If it goes maybe more into the Florida Bend, we could be seeing a little bit more of a turn back into Florida. So a little bit to be paying attention to really quickly here. So a lot to be paying attention to, obviously, as we go on throughout the next couple of hours on what these models could possibly do. So something to definitely pay attention to. Something to be paying attention to right now. So give me 1 second. All right, so I'm back. Here we go. So once again, talking about that curve, possible curve could come back into Florida here. That would be obviously a worst case scenario because of the flooding that will definitely happen. So let's take a look here at some of them, and then you kind of can see some of them actually, majority of them will bring them back in here and then kind of bring them back out. Obviously, that would be terrible because, once the storm, just like I was talking about earlier this morning in this video, when the storm is trying to turn, it slows down completely and stalls. So a little bit to be paying attention to there. Goes up into the north, possibly turns, and it possibly could go back out. So, I mean, everything's on the play here. The operational runs have not been saying that exactly here, but something to pay attention to because the ensembles are still saying it in these areas. So, it's something to pay attention to. It really is. The GFS ensemble saying a little bit more of a different type of scenario here. A little bit more of a different type of scenario that we could be seeing. Taking a look at the GFS ensembles. Big change in the 18Z. I mean, we're barely seeing here with the GFS a storm forming. So this might just be, something interesting for the GFS because you take a look right here for the 18Z that has just been running for the GFS. And now you take a look back here at the model cycle, go back to the 12Z. We see something completely different with the 12Z. I mean, this is a pretty big difference here on how many models just completely changed. So if we head back to the 12Z, though, we'll just have to wait for the 00Z tonight. But if we head back to the 12Z, that recurve, according to the GFS ensembles, we'll just kind of not look at the... Oopsies there. We'll kind of just not look at the... I mean... we'll try not to look at the GFS ensembles now because it just doesn't seem like it's accurate right now, possibly because the National Hurricane Center thinks we'll have a storm, but this obviously still would be the worst case scenario if it continued with this. So still a lot to be paying attention to as we go on throughout the next couple of hours here. We're waiting for the 00Z models to come out still. Really is a lot to pay attention to, and I mean, we've been paying attention to this very closely here. So if you have any questions here, make sure to leave them in the chat. I will be answering them as much as I possibly can. So Florida could be impacted here, that is for sure. There is a pretty good amount of counties that are now under a state of emergency here in Florida. So I want to keep an eye out, obviously, on that. So a little bit more of an interesting situation here to be paying attention to. I mean, models are going crazy. I mean, it's a big difference, but I want to actually take a look at this really quick because I'm seeing this right now here. Trying to get this all out here. So, the GFS ensembles on Tropical Tidbits have completely kind of changed a little bit. So, definitely something to be paying attention to. That, because I would say more of, I mean, that's kind of an interesting situation, I would say. Because I'm kind of curious on exactly why is it, you know, a little different here. So, let's head actually back into Invest 97L here. The GFS Ensembles 18Z has now come out on Tropical Tidbits. And if we take a look here, pretty big difference, I would say. Here, we're taking a look here at the pretty big difference. In this storm, we can clearly see a little bit more of this. So let's do this really quickly here. Let's take a look here at the 12Z, the last spaghetti models here, and compare them to this. So if we put them together here, there we go. So brought them together here. So this is the 12Z on your left, 18Z's on your right. I mean, I wouldn't believe weather nerds now, because it seems like we have a whole big different situation over here, where it seems like we have more models than we did before. But you can kind of see it keeps that same track. Maybe a little bit weaker as it heads off that west coast, but still something to be paying attention to as we look at these spaghetti models here. Really is something, because you could see a lot go inland and then make that recurve, which would be obviously the worst case scenario for Florida. We would see, I mean, a extreme amount of rainfall if the GFS was right here, and we've been watching this all day. So if we really had this area right here and this actually did recurve, we could be expecting over maybe 2 feet of rain here in northern Florida. So something to pay attention to, especially because if it's not strong over here, it could get strong once it gets out here in the Atlantic and then head back over here. This could be an interesting storm. It might just be a normal storm. We'll have to pay attention to it definitely very closely here, but I mean, a lot to be paying attention to as well. So, I mean, as long as we're keeping an eye out on these models, you know, taking a look at the GFS models here. And if you do have any questions, make sure to leave them down below as well. I will try to get to it as much as I can. So if we take a look here at the GFS ensemble, or the GFS model run here, a little bit of a difference here. So we're seeing a little bit more of a southern push here. We see a little bit more of a southern push going into around Sarasota area, instead of more of the Big Bend on where it has been pretty much for the rest of the day here, for the whole day. So a little bit to be paying attention to. A little bit brings it over here, keeping an eye out on this. This could be the area where we want to keep an eye out, obviously, on it after, because it stalls out kind of in there and then heads into North Carolina, South Carolina border, and that would really dump heavy amounts of rain in this area. So if we take a look here at the GFS and what we're anticipating here with the rainfall, you know, but once again, the model run is not saying the curve, so it's a little bit of an interesting situation here for the ensembles. But look at this. Lots and lots of rain we could be expecting over here until August 17th from majority of this just storm. Over here in Florida, obviously we could see maybe a little bit, 10, 14, 16 inches of rain according to the model run. The Carolinas over here, really possibly almost up to 24 inches of rain according to the GFS model, if this model is right. So, but if we take a look here back at earlier's run, a little bit more of a different, because it took a completely different path. Yes, still the Carolinas are getting a lot of rain, but now northern Florida is getting more rain. So we could be seeing a little bit of a flip-flop here, windshield wiper effect going on. You know, this is like the first storm that's really brought it into south, you know, kind of south central Florida here, and brought it back out here. So really is something to pay attention to as we go on, really, throughout the next couple of frames here. But actually, we headed into the European model here. The European model, look at that, big difference. Kind of brings it into South Carolina and parts of Georgia for that, but off the west coast here, pretty big rain. So Something to pay attention to as we go on. I do want to kind of actually take a look at this really quickly here because I'm pretty sure. So we do have an 18Z. It seems like it is coming out here for the European model, the 18Z, right now. So the 18Z is coming out for the European model. Only goes 72 hours out. There's that low pressure system right there. So that's obviously where the storm will most likely be. I wouldn't believe the intensity right now because the European also did really bad with Beryl. But probably once again, it's going to continue to push it off into the bend here. We'll have to keep an eye out on for the 00Z model that will come out most likely at 2, 3, 4 a.m. I don't know the exact times for these models, but going into the 12Z kind of, kept it just a little bit more, I would say. Actually, I think it's pretty much the same. Yeah, about the same. But then the 6Z earlier this morning, terrible with that because a terrible difference, really. Because the European model so far has not been the best accurate model with this system, I would say, because it did say it was going to go on the East Coast, but the GFS made sure it, didn't really go to the East Coast at all. So GFS kind of won on that, but 00Z this morning didn't say much at all was going to form, obviously here. So a little bit to be paying attention to as we're going on, obviously throughout the next couple of days, probably going into tomorrow night. We're really going to want to keep an eye out on these models. They're sending a plane out tomorrow at the National Hurricane Center, so tomorrow will be a very, very big day here on what we could be anticipating, because that's when, by this weekend we're going to start to see these storms start to approach Florida here. So, and take a look here at the intensity models here. Some of these models bring it up to category 1. So really, it's all kind of just a waiting game at this point for tomorrow here. I mean, we could be seeing a little bit of a jump here, but that's more of the 120 to 168 hours out. So could be in the Gulf of Mexico as well. It could be when it gets off of Florida. So really is a big question here. We have a very big question that we have. The waiting for the 00Z model still. If you're just joining in, still waiting for those. Let's go into the ensembles really quick, because I think if we take a look here at the ensembles, I think this will show a little bit more. Look here. So for the Western Atlantic, obviously this is the one we're paying attention to. The European ensembles here at the 12Z. I mean, the main operational run brings it into the Florida Bend and races it off to the northeast here and really impacts those Carolinas. But you can mostly see most of these European models keep it over here over Florida and keep it there for a couple days. And then same thing with the GFS. Let's see with the 18Z as well. Some bring it back into Florida here. I think it's a little bit more split. I would say it's a little bit more split here, because the 12Z was saying a lot more into Florida. Yeah, a lot more into Florida here. And then brings it in. But then now for the GFS with the 18Z, still a little strong storms there, but I mean a little bit more of a northern. So like if it did go in, it kind of would just make a U-turn right there out in the Atlantic. So something to pay attention to. I mean, there's a lot to pay attention to, especially when we're waiting for these models, man. Especially when we're waiting for these models. So something to be paying attention to. Let me see if I can get the weather models here pulled up here. See if they have the 00Z models out. No. Okay, so this is weather models right here. I would say this is not the 00Z models. It doesn't exactly say. But if we take a look, bring it in here, kind of zoom in a little. I mean, kind of just seeing. So if the National Hurricane Center was to draw a cone, kind of just be like this, to be honest. Somewhere in that region right there. I'm not the best at obviously drawing these forecast cones, but models are still very split. So that's kind of why we're waiting for the 00Z models to come out, because that will kind of show if we have a little bit more of a westward type of push here or a little bit more of a eastern type push. Really is going to be a big question here for the United States. So want to keep an eye out on that as well. I mean, it's going to be a very interesting situation here for the 00Z models. And I mean, we're just waiting for those models to really come out. But once again, GFS still bringing it into southern Florida here. I'm going to keep an eye out on that. When does the icon model start to get updated for the 00Z? I don't exactly know. So I'll probably, by the time this stream ends, I'll probably have to, I'll post it to my X. So make sure, follow it. Make sure to stay tuned with that. If you follow it, it's down in the description. Make sure we keep an eye out on some of this because, you know, it's a big thing to pay attention to. So, rainfall, man. Taking a look at the icon rainfall, we can clearly see still big rains off here, Savannah, Georgia, heading into South Carolina, but really over here for the West Coast, and the icon model did really good with Beryl. So, could it do good with this? It could. We'll have to see. Right now, the GFS so far has been the winner on where it's going to head exactly, like what region is going to be in. So, something to pay attention to. I mean, we have a little bit to be paying attention to once again. So, I mean, we're just going to keep an eye out on it right now. It's more of a waiting game. It's more of a waiting game. Let me see if I can go actually here to see if I can go to windy right here. See if we can get a little bit of a outlook here for windy. So, taking a look here at the wind forecast here for the next couple days. Friday, heading into Saturday, not much going on exactly. Where's the storm? You know, that's everyone's question, really. This is the European model. So the European saying a little bit more of a different type of situation here for probably the 18Z. Heading into the GFS model, once again, saying it may be a little bit more of a stronger system here, but if we take a look here at the, zoom in a little bit, for the west coast of Florida, a little bit more of a stronger winds could be. So right out here, that's around 40 miles an hour. So obviously we could just be anticipating tropical storm, but you know, we can clearly see that these, you know, 40 mile an hour tropical storm, you know, maybe for Tampa over here, 28 miles an hour, Spring Hill, 23 at this time. And then we bring it over here more, 32, possibly getting up to maybe 45 miles an hour. The question is how strong does it get into the Gulf? Because we know how the Gulf of Mexico is, but models have not been the absolute best on forecasting the strength. So a little bit something to paying attention to. And really when it gets over here, the GFS starts to maybe pick up on it being maybe a possible hurricane, high tropical storm. So a little bit to be paying attention to closely here, really is closely. So take a look at the future radar here exactly. I mean, get at least a outlook here kind of. So we can clearly see by Saturday, possibly some big rain heading into Florida, then a little bit more on Sunday. And then kind of, yeah. So right now the storm is very sloppy. So it's going to be something interesting to be paying attention to as the storm is very, very sloppy. So waiting for the 00Z models to still come out. So, but once again, you know, have any questions, leave it down in the chat below. I'll try to answer it as much as I possibly can. But once again, still this split right here. I mean, we're pretty confident that it's going to go over Cuba. But the question is where does it go over Cuba? Does it go more of the northern part of Cuba or does it go more of the southern part of Cuba? Because that will play a big factor here on when it gets drawn to the north. So if it goes more northern Cuba, brings it into closer to the west coast of Florida, brings it into more of the Florida Bend. If it goes over here southern type or central type really of Cuba, brings it more into the Florida Panhandle. So really is something to be paying attention to. We're going to keep an eye out on it very closely here. I will make sure to post the ensembles on my X page, so make sure to follow it. Lots of rain could be heading for Florida anyways. So definitely a video update will be put out tomorrow. So make sure you leave a like, subscribe. A video will be put out tomorrow as we go in throughout, you know, tomorrow is going to be a very, very big day here. And then heading into the weekend as the storm goes for the weekend. So really a big concern here when it comes to the tropics at this time of the year. We're August 1st right now. Really when it heads up into Florida, we could be seeing a little bit more of an interesting situation. So once it gets kind of off of Cuba, or at least in this part right here, we're going to know a little bit more. So once again, say southern part of Cuba here, northern part of Cuba, very different scenarios here. We'll have to keep an eye on that and wait for the National Hurricane Center to send out a plane, but majority of the models now bringing it closer to the west coast of Florida here. I don't know why I just drew an arrow but brings it. Majority of the models now starting to agree on the west coast of Florida could get hit. So, and that would be one of the biggest scenarios here with the storm surge here on the west coast of Florida. So, a little bit to be paying attention to. So, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you all being here, and make sure you leave a like and subscribe. Make sure to watch the next video tomorrow especially if you live in Florida, for the latest updates. I will probably be most likely live at the same time tomorrow, so make sure you are staying tuned here, because it does seem like we have a lot to be paying attention to when it comes to this Invest 97L. Please make sure you're staying tuned to the National Hurricane Center and your local National Weather Service offices, and I will make sure to post the 00Z model, so make sure to follow me down below, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Thank you, and have a good night.